Hey, readers! Welcome back to another episode of Not Reading for Content. We are so happy that you are joining us for another Friday. Today is actually a special episode because we have a long month in May, so you guys get us for an extra week. So we're going to have a bonus episode today where we focus on season one. We're going to be reflecting on our thoughts on the season and just talking about some general podcast things with you guys. If you are interested in our next book, we will be starting that next Friday, so you guys have a week to get your books. We will be continuing our translation season with the Posthumous Memoirs of Cubas. So go out to your bookstores, your libraries, and pick up a copy. So we should start with our theme for the first season, which was genre blends. So we're going to talk about what we thought of the genre blends that we chose, which genres we enjoyed, like which blends we enjoyed more than others, if we think that our selection was a fair representation of that genre blend. We're going to talk about all of these things. What do you want to start with, Leandra?
Well, let's do a bit of a refresher on the books we actually read and what genres we even went through. So remember, there were 4 months, and we decided to go through 4 different types of genre blends. And in January, we were going for fantasy mystery. We were kind of chasing our love of the Tainted Cup, I think, but the book we ended up picking up was The Village Library Demon Hunting Society. Then in February, I feel as though we were having the goal of like balancing things out. So we went from fantasy mystery to sci-fi horror, two completely different genres with Day of the Triffids. March was our crazy, crazy month with the romantasy, so romance fantasy. And then we ended up kind of going back. Oh, and the book we ended up reading for that was The Games Gods Play. And then finally in April, we tried for a horror mystery. So again, kind of bringing back genres we'd already touched, but in a different combination with The Hitchcock Hotel. I feel as though when you're looking at the types of genre blends we were working with, we did provide a pretty good balance. I don't feel as though I have any criticisms. I'm trying to think of the genre blends I would have liked to see, but if I mentioned them, it'd be because those are the types of books I like. For instance, sci-fi mystery. Wouldn't have been mad at that, but I don't know if it would have worked for the groupings that we had created. How do you feel about just like the choices of types of genre blends we went for?
I think that we had a really good mix, and I also think that we didn't stay within our comfort zones either. We did
Oh yeah.
choose like some fan favorites for us, fantasy mystery, but I think that we went out on a limb with the romantasy title, and even with some things that we are a little bit more familiar with our sci-fi horror, I think that we took a risk with picking a classic. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that they were pretty well-rounded selections. Now, do I think though that some of them were a little sketchy with the selection of the book that we chose? Yes. You did mention that with fantasy mystery, we were hoping to, live up to the Tainted Cup, which I mean is a tall order to begin with. And so maybe it's not fair to compare this book to that, but I don't think this book was good. Now, I will say as
No.
far as well, maybe not. I was gonna say, as far as the genre blend, do I believe it to be an actual fantasy mystery, The Village Library Demon Hunting Society? I do think that it was one that did blend the 2. I don't
Mm.
think it did mystery very well, but it did attempt.
Yeah, I feel as though the coziness, right? The other thing we've got to acknowledge is we were chasing the Tainted Cup, but we also did know it wouldn't be because we already knew it was cozy. It's super, super cozy. And what's strange about it is that it didn't really feel mystery enough to me at times, even though there were all of these different nods to the genre. But it also didn't feel fantasy enough because it was just a small town and this like weird demon god was obsessed with like cozy mysteries, and so nothing fantasy was happening beyond their existence. Like
Yeah.
it was just, yeah, it was honestly a very weird start to our podcast, even though we did have our pilot season, which I think tonally kind of vibed with the Tainted Cup, but we also
Yes.
didn't find that to be a fantasy mystery either. So we kind of struck out in finding the blending of the two genres we were looking for, which is kind of interesting. And you also just bring up a good point that I think that we had a couple instances where we didn't feel like the blending was strong enough. Either it didn't really feel like it had two different genres, or one of them just, wasn't strong enough. Because even like Day of the Triffids, it felt more dystopian sci-fi that could be horrific at times, but I wouldn't say this was horror. But maybe we're coming from a modern lens of horror, because sometimes I think about that with classic horror, and I'm like, this would feel like a thriller to me today. But is that because it's 2025? I don't know. And then The Hitchcock Hotel, by the end of it, I felt like it was a bit thriller to me.
Yeah, I
So,
100% agree with that one. Yeah. Surprisingly enough, I thought the one that actually fit the mold the best was The Games Gods Play, which was the one I thought we were going to strike out on as far as picking a genre blend, because I don't seem to understand what romantasy is. And
no.
maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's not romantasy. We'll have to leave it up to the viewers to tell us whether or not that one was actually a romantasy. But I feel like some of the other ones, I definitely think that the Hitchcock Hotel was a little bit of a letdown for me for mystery horror. I definitely think it leaned thriller. And we talked about that at the very beginning of that book, in mystery horror being a difficult genre blend to get right, because of the fact that there are so many components that do blend with thrillers as well within those two genres. The others, the fantasy mystery, the Village Library Demon Hunting Society, I was very disappointed at the fact that it was not as good of a blend as I really wanted it to be, because I feel like fantasy and mystery are two genres that are fairly easy to blend together.
I agree, especially because, I mean, we've seen this before in multiple different types of kind of fantasy mystery elements where, I mean, if you lean into the mystery A plot, where like you're solving a murder or something like that, the murder can be magical, right?
Yeah.
It can involve potions or, magical creatures, or obviously it's taking place in a very rich fantasy world. So there is a very easy way to put the two together versus this. I think that one, what's weird about it is it just felt like the two genres remained separate the entire time.
Yeah, I agree.
So you could feel when you were in the mystery section and feel when you were supposed to be in the fantasy section, but they didn't actually blend. It's like oil and water, right? Those things don't
Yes.
mix. That's pretty much what we were seeing for that one. And what's also kind of fun to maybe reflect on for a second is, the other options we were considering. I don't know if you remember any of them, and also which months were the hardest to kind of narrow down. I think that maybe The Games Gods Play was the last one we really slotted in because we weren't sure. And I distinctly remember we thought about, is it Water Moon, that fantasy?
One of them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we, phoned in to the experts after the fact, because Rainy from Rainy Blue Reads, the person that we know who reads so much romantasy, was like, what were you thinking? Why'd you choose The Games Gods Play? And I was like, well, we thought about Water Moon. She's like, so that's not a romantasy. And I was like, well, do you see what we were doing? We clearly didn't know what we were doing.
I'm glad that we didn't choose Water Moon, because I DNF'd that book.
Well, that's right. I completely forgot that you did.
At least I finished The Games Gods Play. But yeah, that definitely was a hard book to pick, because we were trying to pick something that was fair to the genre blend, because it is not something that either of us really read a ton of. I personally have read multiple romantasies that I deem romantasies, that when I talk to the pros, they're like, that's not a romantasy. That's like a fantasy with a subplot of romance. And I'm like, okay, well, it's enough romance for me. And I didn't want to fall back into those old habits in selecting a book when we're calling it a romantasy.
Right. And then there's also the term fanro, which is apparently different, like fantasy romance, which is probably where we would fit more. And yeah, we just didn't want to cheat the system, friends. We didn't want to cheat the system. The masses were saying The Games Gods Play counts. So, okay, there was a sequel coming out that we could potentially look forward to. Spoiler, we are not looking forward to it. We're not going to read it. But I think on top of that, at the end of the day, as a podcast, a book club that is hoping to reach, a wide audience, and as two creators of said podcast that lean heavily on library systems, we understood that maybe the biggest goal, the biggest reason to put a book in a specific month was because it's accessible. Right? Either it's been published recently, so we know that it's popular, that people could at least put a hold on the library, or it's been out for some time, so they have access to physical, ebook, audio. We didn't want to choose anything too obscure, because I think the four that we chose, ended up being quite accessible. The one that might have been the hardest to find was Village Library Demon Hunting Society. I can't believe I still remember where to put all of those nouns. And that was because it was too new. I remember there were a few people mentioning that they were on hold for quite some time just because it was too fresh, we'll call it. But at the end of the day, I guess the question is, would we do a genre blends season again? Did we like it? Was it worth it? What were your thoughts, Danny?
I definitely like genre blends. So I would say that 100% I would do another genre blend for this podcast. I think I might want to change up the selection process, maybe the setup of how we structured the season, the fact that we had 4 genre blends in a row. Like, I feel like there's a lot of things that maybe we can play with in the days to come to kind of manipulate this to maybe choose some better reads for us, because I do think that we haven't had large successes with a lot of the books that we have chosen. So we're still kind of looking for that perfect setup that's going to allow us to choose those hidden gems for us, because while it might be fun for you guys in the audience to see us read books that we don't like, we really want to read books that we love.
Yeah. And you know what? That is really interesting to reflect on, because how many buddy reads have we done off camera without anyone listening? And we found some of our like all-time favorites, some really excellent like books that we were invested in, authors we want to investigate more. And then as soon as we get in front of a mic, as soon as we have an official podcast with the public listening to us, we're like, so none of these books really hit the way we wanted them to. And I think the most successful one was our pilot episode. And you only gave it a 3.75. Like, it really wasn't even arguably that successful. So it's kind of wild to reflect on these, 4 books and being like, is the season working? Because like you said, four books in a row, 4 months in a row, we initially probably thought it would be great because we're like, okay, that means 3 seasons a year. We can plan far ahead. We were kind of thinking, oh, we can batch plan. We can let people know the 4 books ahead of time, all of these things. And that's great. But also trends change. We change. There's just, I don't know. I feel like it is a lot to, I guess, like put our eggs in one basket. The idea of a 4-month season. And it's also, if we're going to be honest, friends, a lot of work. Not necessarily equal work either. I will be the first to say that Danny does the most for the podcast. Yes, we both read the book. We both show up to record, but Danny is in charge of all of the audio. I don't even touch it. She's in charge of the video, of making sure that it gets transferred to YouTube, gets sent out to Spotify and all the other podcasts. And while I do some other finessing things, like I'll do the description, I'll do the thumbnails, that is only because it's the least I can do. Like, I am happy to do that very minimal task that maybe takes me a half an hour, not even. And so the idea of placing so much work on one person, especially when we're doing it once a week, right? We're having this podcast come out once every Friday without any breaks. And so we kind of are in discussion about how we might change the podcast up. And I was really glad, Danny, that you felt comfortable saying that to me, because I need you to be fully open with me, because like I said, you're the one who does most of the work. I like truly, I'm so grateful to you because you do so much while also juggling so many other things. We both have our own, booktubes to juggle in addition to regular life. And so you ended up bringing up an option. And I don't know if you want to disclose that to the public, and we can kind of volley the various things we've brainstormed so far.
Yeah, sure. First off, I would like to say that I do a lot of work, but I also enjoy it. I love our discussions. It's very, very fun. I have a great time. So I don't want that to come off as like, I hate this, I'm doing too much. But to be fair, like, we do both have lives. As you said, we both have YouTube channels. We both have we both have jobs outside of the booktube community. And so it is definitely something that we need to have open discussions about, as far as like, how can we keep this sustainable? Because I want to keep doing it. I want to keep having discussions. I want to still be able to have our book club, because I love it. I think it's so fun. So one of the suggestions that I had, just because I was feeling a little bit of burnout, I think in the middle of, well, actually, I think maybe it was the beginning of season 2, which we haven't started yet with you, or not season 2. We have started season 2, but
I know it's like, what is time? We don't know when things start.
Where are we in the schedule? But I do think it was at the beginning of season 2, I started to feel a little bit of burnout, and we started talking about season 3 and upcoming plans. And I was like, is it possible for us to maybe take some time off? Like, can we do maybe 3 months on and then 1 month off? Which then brought us into the discussion of consistency. Is it better for us to have like an entire month off where we're not doing anything for an entire month? Or is it better to lessen the burden for multiple months by maybe spreading out episodes or spreading out books? And the conversation definitely, like, we went through several phases. So you suggested a couple of things. Do you want to go through those?
Yeah, I the longer we kind of open this discussion up, I was like, the world is our oyster. We have so many opportunities. And I'm glad that you mentioned this. It's not that we are finding this a burden. We really do enjoy doing this. It's really fun. But like as you said, we need to make sure that we have plans or policies or whatever in state to sustain it.
Yes.
Because if you're enjoying something, you want it to last longer. But if the system isn't working, well, then we need to change the system to ensure that we can keep having fun. So I'm totally here for that. But yeah, so you brought up the idea of just like going on maybe a month-long hiatus every 3 months. I was thinking, well, we could also just lessen the number of episodes we're doing. Instead of doing once every Friday, what if we do it once every other week? So it's, a bi-monthly type of podcast, 2 Fridays, maybe 3, depending on how the Fridays land, we would have an episode. But then that brought up the question of, well, then what do we do with the book club? Are we then extending our reading of a book across 2 months? Or are we just lessening the number of episodes dedicated to each book? Because right now, as we all know, we have 4 episodes. We've got a hype episode, and then we break the book up into 3 different parts. And so if we broke down those 4 episodes to 2, well, the episodes we would likely keep would be the hype episode, and then we would also just come together once we've all finished the book and just have a full-on discussion about our thoughts. Would that retract, enough from the conversation where it wouldn't be fun anymore? Because the whole idea is for us to really dig deep and discuss, these books thoroughly. And then we were thinking, well, is it possible for us to shorten our conversations? Like, can we be a bit more succinct? Do we need the episodes to be, 40 to 60 minutes long, every single week? We don't need to do that. But again, can we? As the people who know us, who know that we like to talk, are we able to do that? And then I think that ended up transitioning to the possibility of maybe just making the book club every other month rather than, again, this idea of 4 months all in a row, one season. We would probably remove the seasons from that too. So the question is like, what elements do we like? What elements do we just not feel any sort of way towards? Like, I think we almost have to have a discussion about what are our non-negotiables?
Right.
What do we want to keep for the podcast? And then what's something that could change that really wouldn't affect us either way?
Right. And I will say, just to throw out a couple of things for me as far as non-negotiables that just pop into my head. I love the discussion piece. But that can be manipulated, amongst the variety of options that we've discussed. But I do think that digging into the nitty-gritty and being able to spend time fully discussing the little minute details that we might not be able to discuss if we, just did one episode for a book or whatever. So I do think that that's something that I would like to keep. Something that I think, as far as just in the reflection of season 1, that I would like to boot is somehow we need to manipulate our selection process so we're enjoying the books more, because the more we enjoy the books, the easier this process is going to be, right? Because we're not only are we getting the discussion out of it, we're enjoying the piece, the camaraderie of hating a book, but we could absolutely love a book, love the time that we spend with the book outside of, being on camera. We have that time to also enjoy as well. So I think those two, that's one thing I would like to keep, one thing I would like to change.
Yeah, and I also really enjoy our discussions. And I think that for me, I am totally down for us to keep those like super in detailed conversations. The one thing to consider though is if we want to keep that, then how do we maintain this? How would we keep our in-depth discussions? And I suppose an option could be that we don't read a book every month, but we keep episodes going. What would we do then? So then maybe we read a book one month, and then the following month, instead of reading a book for the book club, we have other episodes. How do we feel about that? Could we have more bonus episodes like this, where we discuss various topics? And in that case, like, what would we discuss? Like, how would you feel about that, Danny?
I love that idea because for those of you in the audience, you don't know because we cut a lot of our little side conversations as we're going through because we talk for a long time on these episodes. You guys just don't know it. And we do get off on tangents where we will fixate on a really, really minute detail, whether or not it be something cultural. And we want to like dive into all these different cultures, or if it's linguistics, we've done that a couple of times where we will pinpoint something in that, and we will talk about it for like 30 minutes just trying to like organize our thoughts, and then us be like, maybe this doesn't need to be in the podcast. And so we end up having to cut some of those conversations just because of how in depth we go into them. And so it would be kind of fun to allow ourselves to be able to have those discussions on an actual episode.
Yeah, I didn't even consider the things that you've got to cut when we're editing. For me, I was thinking of the sometimes hour-long discussions we have before we even press play. Like sometimes when we come together into the studio and we're chatting, we are just talking about our life and things. But a lot of times we're catching up on what we've been reading, various books that are on our radar. What was our most like latest book haul? We get all of that out of the way as we catch up. And sometimes it does take quite a bit of time. Like I think there have been times when we've been chatting for 2 hours and we're like, okay, let's actually finally record this episode. And so we have the material, we have the discussions. We just typically have them off camera and without mics. But I think that there could be some really good back and forth. And then it allows like less pressure for people who are watching, but maybe just aren't going to participate in the book. Well, then they do have other discussions they can join in without spoiling themselves as well, because we have this expectation, or supposedly, where if people are, following along with every episode, they are guaranteed to get spoiled for books that they may never read, but it's still not always that fun. Whereas these like bonus discussions about themes, it can be recommendation videos, all of that kind of stuff. That could be really fun for us too. And just a lot easier on like the process. We're not coming in having to have read 100 pages of a book to be able to sit down and discuss. So I think that might just be easier all around.
Yeah, I agree. But that's not to say we've actually made a decision yet. So, friends, this is not an episode where you are going to get a conclusion at the end. We're kind of going to leave it as an ambiguous ending for you because we are still trying to figure out things ourselves. This is really just a discussion for us to hash out things, let you guys know what our thoughts are, our reflections on past seasons. And we are still really excited to continue the season of translations with you guys next month. So we really hope that you will join us for the discussions in June. We are going to be reading the posthumous memoirs of Cubas. So if you would like to follow along, make sure you pick up your books. We'll be back next Friday.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. And for reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can listeners find you, Danny?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. What about you?
I have the same platforms. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra_the TBR0. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.